17-year-old Marcus Thompson was getting ready for what should have been the most memorable night of his high school career. Prom night. He had his tuxedo pressed, his corsage ready, and his whole future ahead of him. But as he stood in front of his bedroom mirror, adjusting his bow tie one last time, he had no idea that the woman he trusted most in the world, his stepmother Sarah, had already destroyed his life in the most unthinkable way possible. By midnight that same evening, Marcus would discover a devastating truth about what had been done to him, and by the end of the week, someone would be dead. This isn't just another story about betrayal. This is about how one woman's selfish actions tore apart a family, infected an innocent teenager with a deadly virus, and led to a murder that shocked the entire community of Millfield, Ohio. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about trust, family, and justice. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, what I'm about to share with you involves sensitive content including sexual assault, HIV transmission, and murder. This story isn't about sensationalism or gossip. It's about examining the devastating consequences when someone we trust the most becomes our greatest threat. It's about a teenage boy whose life was destroyed by the very person who was supposed to protect him. And it's about how betrayal can drive ordinary people to commit extraordinary acts of violence. The facts in this case are disturbing, but they need to be told. Because sometimes, understanding how evil can hide behind a friendly face is the only way we can protect ourselves and the people we love. Stay with me until the end, because the way this story unfolds is unlike anything you've ever heard before. Marcus Thompson was everything you'd expect from a small-town Ohio teenager. At 17, he was the captain of his high school basketball team, maintained a 3.8 GPA, and had already received early acceptance letters to 3 different colleges. His teachers described him as respectful, hardworking, and genuinely kind. Marcus had dreams of becoming a veterinarian, inspired by his childhood memories of helping injured animals in his backyard. He lived with his father David, who worked as a foreman at the local manufacturing plant, and his stepmother Sarah, who had joined their family when Marcus was just 12 years old. On the surface, they seemed like the perfect blended family. David and Sarah had been married for 5 years, and Marcus had grown to see Sarah as more than just his father's wife. She was the mother figure he'd never really had, since his biological mother had passed away when he was 8. Marcus trusted Sarah completely. She drove him to basketball practice, helped him with his college applications, and even offered to help him get ready for prom night. That trust, that innocent belief that family meant safety, would become the very thing that destroyed him. As prom night approached, Marcus was excited but nervous. He'd asked Jennifer Walsh, his longtime crush, to be his date, and she had said yes. Everything seemed perfect in his world. Sarah Thompson appeared to be the ideal stepmother and wife. At 34, she was attractive, well-spoken, and seemed to genuinely care about Marcus's well-being. She worked part-time as a dental hygienist and was active in the local PTA. Neighbors often commented on how lucky David was to find such a devoted woman who treated his son like her own. But behind closed doors, Sarah was hiding a devastating secret. 3 years earlier, she had tested positive for HIV after a brief affair with a coworker. The diagnosis had shattered her world, but instead of telling her husband or seeking proper treatment, she had chosen denial and deception. She convinced herself that if she just ignored it, maybe it would go away. She started drinking more heavily, became increasingly manipulative, and began exhibiting disturbing behavioral changes that her family attributed to work stress. Sarah had always been jealous of the close relationship between Marcus and his father. As Marcus grew older and more independent, her resentment deepened. She felt like an outsider in her own home, watching David pour all his attention and pride into his son's achievements. In Sarah's twisted mind, Marcus had become the obstacle to her happiness. She began fantasizing about ways to hurt him, to take away the innocence and future that she felt had been stolen from her by her diagnosis. The opportunity came when David had to travel out of town for work the weekend before prom. Sarah would be alone in the house with Marcus, and she had been planning what she would do for weeks. The evening of April 15th started like any other prom night in small-town America. Marcus had spent the entire day preparing, getting his hair cut, picking up his rented tuxedo, and nervously checking his reflection every few minutes. His father, David, had left early that morning for a business trip to Cleveland, promising to call that evening to hear all about the prom. Sarah seemed unusually cheerful and attentive, offering to help Marcus with his bow tie and taking dozens of photos as he got ready. Around 6 o'clock, she suggested they have a pre-prom celebration with some champagne she had been saving for a special occasion. Marcus was hesitant at first, knowing he was underage, but Sarah insisted it was a family tradition and that one glass wouldn't hurt. She poured him a generous serving of what she claimed was champagne, but which had been mixed with a significant amount of prescription sleep medication she had been saving from her own anxiety prescriptions. Within 30 minutes, Marcus began feeling dizzy and confused. Sarah helped him to the couch, claiming he must be nervous about the big night. She assured him that he just needed to rest for a few minutes and that she would take care of everything. The last thing Marcus remembered clearly was Sarah telling him that she would help him feel better, that she knew exactly what he needed. When he woke up several hours later, he was in his own bed, still partially dressed in his prom attire, with no clear memory of what had happened. Sarah was nowhere to be found, and his phone showed multiple missed calls and texts from Jennifer, wondering where he was. What Sarah did to Marcus that night was beyond comprehension. While he was incapacitated by the drugs she had given him, she sexually assaulted her own stepson, but her crime went far beyond even that unthinkable violation. Knowing that she was HIV positive, Sarah deliberately engaged in unprotected sexual contact with Marcus, fully aware that she was potentially giving him a death sentence. This wasn't a moment of passion or a terrible mistake. This was a calculated, premeditated act of violence against a child who trusted her completely. Sarah had planned this for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity when David would be out of town and Marcus would be vulnerable. She had researched the timing, understood the risks, and made the conscious decision to potentially destroy Marcus's life simply because she could. In the days following the assault, Sarah acted as if nothing had happened. She asked Marcus about prom, pretended to be concerned about why he had missed it, and even offered to help him make up with Jennifer. Marcus, traumatized and confused, began experiencing gaps in his memory and strange physical symptoms, but he couldn't piece together what had happened to him. He trusted Sarah's explanations that he had gotten sick and that she had taken care of him. The manipulation was as devastating as the assault itself. Sarah was not just destroying Marcus's body. She was systematically destroying his mind and his ability to trust his own perceptions. How do you process the fact that someone who tucked you in at night and made you breakfast in the morning had deliberately tried to kill you? In the weeks following that horrific night, Marcus began experiencing symptoms that he couldn't understand or explain. He was constantly exhausted, running low-grade fevers, and suffering from persistent headaches. His basketball performance declined dramatically, and his teachers noticed that he seemed distracted and withdrawn. When he went to the family doctor for what he thought was just a persistent flu, the initial tests came back normal. But Dr. Patricia Mills, who had known Marcus since he was a child, was concerned enough to run more comprehensive blood work. The results would change everything. 3 weeks after prom night, Dr. Mills called the Thompson household with news that would destroy their family forever. Marcus had tested positive for HIV. The silence on the phone was deafening as she explained the results, recommended immediate treatment, and asked the questions that needed to be asked about how a 17-year-old boy with no history of drug use or sexual activity could have contracted the virus. Marcus was devastated, confused, and terrified. David rushed home from work, unable to process what he was hearing. And Sarah? Sarah feigned shock and concern, even going so far as to suggest that Marcus must have been engaging in risky behavior that he was too embarrassed to admit. But David knew his son. He knew Marcus's character, his values, and his complete honesty about everything in his life. The pieces began falling into place when David remembered Sarah's strange behavior on prom night, her evasive answers about what had happened to Marcus, and the growing suspicion that had been nagging at him for weeks. If this story is hitting you as hard as it's hitting me, drop a comment with "Justice for Marcus." Let's see who's still watching at this point. I need to know you're here with me because what comes next is going to shock you even more. The confrontation between David and Sarah happened on a rainy Thursday evening in May, exactly 1 month after prom night. David had spent days researching, consulting with medical professionals, and working with local police to understand how his son could have been infected. When he finally cornered Sarah in their kitchen and demanded the truth, she initially continued to deny everything. But when David revealed that he had secretly obtained copies of her medical records through a contact at the hospital where she worked, Sarah's facade crumbled completely. She admitted to being HIV positive for 3 years. She admitted to never telling David or seeking proper treatment. And finally, in a moment of cold, calculating honesty that would haunt David for the rest of his life, she admitted to what she had done to Marcus. Sarah showed no remorse, no shame, no recognition of the magnitude of her crime. Instead, she blamed Marcus for being David's favorite, blamed David for not paying enough attention to her needs, and blamed the world for dealing her an unfair hand with her diagnosis. She had infected Marcus deliberately, she said, because she wanted David to know what it felt like to watch someone you love suffer and die. The conversation was recorded by David, who had suspected what he might hear and wanted evidence. As Sarah's confession poured out, David felt something break inside him that would never be repaired. This wasn't just betrayal. This was the systematic destruction of his family by someone he had loved and trusted for 5 years. This was attempted murder of his child, carried out by the woman who had promised to love and protect their family. David's world collapsed in that moment, and with it, any hope of resolving this through conventional means. What happened next divided the community of Millfield like nothing in its history. On the evening of May 18th, exactly 5 weeks after prom night, Sarah Thompson was found dead in the basement of the family home. She had been struck multiple times with a baseball bat, Marcus's old Little League bat that had been hanging in the garage for years. When police arrived at the scene, they found David Thompson sitting calmly at his kitchen table, the recorded confession playing on his phone, with the bloody bat beside him. He made no attempt to deny what he had done. He looked the first officer in the eye and said, "She tried to murder my son. She gave him HIV on purpose. I couldn't let her get away with it." Marcus was at school when it happened, unaware that his stepmother was dead or that his father had killed her. When police came to the school to tell him what had occurred, Marcus broke down completely. He was traumatized not just by Sarah's death, but by learning the full truth of what she had done to him. The recording of Sarah's confession became crucial evidence, but it also became the most heartbreaking piece of testimony anyone in that courtroom would ever hear. Here was a woman admitting to deliberately infecting a child with a deadly virus simply out of jealousy and spite. Here was a father listening to the destruction of his family and making a split-second decision that would change 3 lives forever. The community was torn. Some saw David as a hero who had protected his son from further harm. Others saw him as a murderer who had taken justice into his own hands when the legal system should have been allowed to work. The investigation into Sarah's murder was one of the most complex and emotionally charged cases in Millfield's history. Detective Lisa Rodriguez, who led the investigation, later said she had never encountered a case where the evidence was so clear, but the moral questions were so complicated. David's confession was immediate and complete. The physical evidence was overwhelming. The motive was documented in Sarah's own recorded words, but the more investigators learned about what Sarah had done to Marcus, the more they understood David's actions. Medical experts confirmed that Sarah had indeed transmitted HIV to Marcus deliberately, knowing full well the potential consequences. The timeline of her infection, her lack of treatment, and the circumstances of Marcus's assault painted a picture of premeditated attempted murder. Sarah's medical records revealed that she had researched HIV transmission methods and had been tracking her viral load in the weeks leading up to the assault. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a carefully planned attack on an innocent child. The legal team faced an unprecedented challenge. How do you prosecute a father for killing the woman who had deliberately infected his son with a deadly virus? How do you balance justice for Sarah's murder against justice for Marcus's assault? The case attracted national attention, with legal experts, medical professionals, and ethicists all weighing in on the moral complexities involved. David was charged with second-degree murder, but the circumstances of the case made it unlike any murder trial anyone had ever seen. The trial of David Thompson became a media sensation that divided public opinion across the country. The prosecution argued that regardless of Sarah's crimes, David had no right to take justice into his own hands. They painted him as a vigilante who had murdered an unarmed woman in cold blood. The defense, however, presented David as a father who had acted in temporary insanity after discovering the unthinkable truth about what had been done to his son. Sarah's recorded confession was played in court, leaving many jurors in tears as they heard her callous admission of deliberately infecting Marcus. Medical experts testified about the long-term implications of HIV infection and the psychological trauma Marcus would face for the rest of his life. Character witnesses described David as a loving father and law-abiding citizen who had never shown any signs of violence before discovering his wife's crimes. The trial lasted 6 weeks, with testimony that revealed the full scope of Sarah's betrayal and David's desperate reaction. In the end, the jury reached a compromise verdict that reflected the impossible moral questions at the heart of the case. David was convicted of voluntary manslaughter rather than murder, acknowledging that while his actions were illegal, they were driven by extreme emotional disturbance upon discovering his son had been deliberately infected with HIV. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole in 5. The verdict satisfied no one completely, but represented the jury's attempt to balance justice for Sarah's death with understanding for David's impossible situation. Today, Marcus Thompson is 22 years old. Thanks to early intervention and modern HIV treatments, his viral load is undetectable, and he's living a relatively normal life. He's studying veterinary medicine at Ohio State University, pursuing the dream that almost died with him on prom night. But the scars of what happened to him run deeper than any medical condition. Marcus has struggled with trust issues, PTSD, and the complex emotions that come with knowing that his stepmother tried to kill him and that his father killed her to protect him. He visits David in prison every month, and their relationship, while strained, remains strong. David has become an advocate for HIV awareness and family protection laws while serving his sentence. He's scheduled for parole next year and plans to rebuild his relationship with Marcus, though both know that their family will never be the same. The case led to changes in Ohio law regarding HIV transmission and domestic violence. Sarah's deliberate infection of Marcus is now classified as attempted murder under state statutes, and the legal system has developed better protocols for handling cases involving intentional disease transmission. But perhaps the most important impact of this case is the conversation it has started about trust, family, and the hidden dangers that can exist in our own homes. Sarah Thompson appeared to be a loving stepmother and devoted wife. No one suspected the darkness that lived behind her smile. How many other families are living with similar secrets? How many other children are vulnerable to people they trust completely? As I finish telling you this story, I'm left with more questions than answers. Was David Thompson a murderer or a protector? Was justice truly served when he received 8 years for killing the woman who had deliberately infected his son with HIV? Could this tragedy have been prevented if someone had recognized the warning signs of Sarah's mental deterioration? And most importantly, how do we protect innocent children from the people who are supposed to love them most? Marcus Thompson survived, but his childhood died on prom night. His trust in family, his sense of safety, and his belief in the goodness of people were all destroyed by someone who was supposed to protect him. The physical virus that Sarah gave him can be managed with medication. The emotional virus of betrayal will last forever. What do you think about this case? Was David's reaction understandable, or was there another way to handle Sarah's crimes? Should parents have the right to protect their children by any means necessary, or should we always trust the legal system to deliver justice? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know. If you were in David's position, what would you have done? Would you have been able to trust the courts to properly punish someone who had deliberately infected your child with a deadly virus? These are the questions that keep me awake at night, and I suspect they'll stay with you too. Thank you for watching, and remember to subscribe for more true crime stories that matter.